Congress needs.
Oh man. Uh-oh, not working. What is going on? I can't get the camera working.
The camera? Does it again do the thing? Turn it on, turn it off?
I did it 3 times. I turned it on, I turned it off, I deactivated an OBS, I activated it.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't try unplugging it, plug it back in? I wouldn't do it from the camera, I would just do it from the wall to make it easy on me. Oh, okay. I'm not supposed to be on FaceTime in here, apparently.
Well, I'll call you in a second. Okay. Ooh, I think we're working. Okay, all right. I think I did it. Hi guys, happy Wednesday, happy hump day. It's Wednesday night. I got a little bit of a late start. I was having some technical issues. Welcome to my stream. I am Mrs. Dave the Lawyer, aka Jacqueline Leah. Tonight we are listening to the Senate. Chairman Rick Scott is talking about how we got a problem with Chinese and Indian pharmaceuticals. So this should be interesting. I have my own views on this topic, know a lot about this topic. If you're new here, I'm Mrs. Dave the Lawyer. I am also very much into health, wellness, fitness, and this stream is definitely up my alley. I'm a multitasker. I love to get my steps in, and I use these streams to walk on my walking pad / treadmill. If you see me on my phone during the stream, I'm not texting anybody. I'm actually in the live chat, chatting with you guys. Please participate, and let's get started. hold on one sec. Guys, again, I'm having some technical difficulties. Hold on.
To do everything it can to change that. 91% of prescriptions in the United States are for generic drugs. And many older Americans rely on one or more medications to lead healthy and happy lives. This Congress, I've worked closely with Ranking Member Gillibrand to push the federal government to do everything it can to ensure older Americans have access to safe and high-quality drugs. We sent letters to the Secretaries of HHS, the Department of War, and the VA about our reliance on Communist China and India for generic drugs. We've sent a letter to the FDA asking about foreign inspections and the quality of drugs coming into our country. We also wrote letters to group purchasing organizations, distributors, and pharmacies, asking where they source their drugs and the information they have about low-quality foreign generics. Last year, this committee held 3 hearings on the quality of the medications seniors rely on. First, we held a hearing on the quality problems with foreign generics and our reliance on Communist China and India for drugs. We followed that up with a hearing on solutions on how to bring drug manufacturing back to the United States. Then we heard from American drug manufacturers on the problems they face and what the federal government can do to help them. This January, we held a hearing where I was proud to announce the Clear Labels Act with Ranking Member Gillibrand, a bipartisan bill that would require manufacturers to disclose where the drug and drug ingredients, or API, are manufactured. You know where your car is made, where the food you eat is from, but you don't know where the medications you or a loved one comes from. That doesn't make any sense. I encourage all members of this committee to co-sponsor this bill so that all Americans can know where their medications are manufactured. At our last hearing on generic drugs in March, we brought in experts on Communist China to discuss how our over-reliance on foreign drugs was no accident, but a very deliberate policy by the CCP and also Washington politicians choosing profits over patients. But today, we want to focus on the real Americans that these low-quality foreign drugs are harming. A researcher from Indiana University testified before this committee that generic drugs made in India have 54% more serious adverse events than equivalent drugs made in the U.S., including hospitalization, disability, and death. That means American patients and their family members taking medications to manage health conditions or recover from illnesses or procedures are ending up in the hospital, potentially even dying. This should never happen in our country, but it's been going on for decades. In 2008, contaminated heparin from Communist China killed nearly 100 Americans. This was a life-saving blood thinner medication that these people needed, and it killed them. Leroy Hubley lost his wife of 48 years, Bonnie, and his son, Randy, because of contaminated heparin from Communist China. They relied on this medication for their dialysis treatment they were undergoing due to a genetic kidney disease, and it killed them. Those drugs never should have been made into our country. But these are there are sadly too many such stories. In 2023, contaminated eye drops from India killed 4 people and blinded 14 others. This cannot keep happening. But as long as we are not regularly testing drugs coming from Communist China and India and lag behind in foreign inspections, poor quality drugs from these countries will keep coming into America. Under the current framework, we simply cannot rely on the drugs coming from Communist China and India to be the same quality as drugs made right here in America. It's been almost 2 decades since the heparin incident, and we're even more reliant on Communist China and India for medications than we were then. The bottom line is foreign manufacturers are not being held to the same standards as domestic manufacturers. This lets bad actors cut corners. And when it comes to patient safety, patients' lives are on the line. Here in the U.S., the FDA doesn't announce when it goes to inspect a manufacturing facility, but overseas, in Communist China and India, the majority of inspections are pre-announced, so they can clean up any problems they've got. While I support the FDA's efforts to increase unannounced foreign inspections, inspections alone can't solve this problem. The problem is the FDA relies on manufacturers to submit data on an honor system. Foreign manufacturers know this, and bad actors are taking advantage of gaps in the FDA's oversight. We saw this in 2013 when Ranbaxy settled with the Department of Justice for $500 million for falsifying data and systemic violations of FDA good manufacturing practices. The FDA cannot trust foreign manufacturers that have a financial incentive to cut corners on quality to be honest brokers. Congress needs to look at solutions to systemic gaps in the FDA's ability to conduct oversight of foreign manufacturers. The FDA considers all approved generics to be equivalent. but data shows us this is not the case. This is why testing drugs for quality is so important. In her hearing in March, China RX author Rosemary Gibson testified about the Department of War's testing of generic drugs. What they have found so far is shocking. Of 13 medicines tested, 15% were found to have serious manufacturing defects, including containing toxins, carcinogens, and not dissolving properly. These stories of bad quality drugs coming from Communist China and India aren't isolated incidents. The problem is systemic. The federal government needs to do everything we can to make the drugs that Americans and seniors rely on here in America and bring manufacturing back here. Put simply, a country that cannot provide for itself cannot protect itself, and it cannot remain safe, strong and prosperous in the long run. America is too great a country to be as vulnerable as we are on this matter. When American manufacturing is not an option, we must turn to our allied nations with proven testing standards, not adversaries and bad actors who cut corners at the expense of American lives. I hope that today's hearing we can draw attention to the people and their family members who have been affected by these poor quality foreign drugs. We have a great witness panel here today who are advocates for transparency and patient safety and can speak to these long-standing quality issues with foreign generics. Now I'd like to turn over to the Ranking Member Gillibrand for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and thank you for calling today's hearing. Welcome to all our witnesses. I'm very grateful to meet you and excited to hear your testimony. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation on how we can improve the quality and reliability of our generic drug supply chain. As we've heard from our previous hearings, these supply chains are vulnerable to disruption. With decreased domestic manufacturing, we are putting ourselves in an increasingly perilous position. Underlying market factors in the United States have led to a race to the bottom where incentives for manufacturers are solely based on cost, not quality. While almost all generic drugs that Americans take are safe, Congress must empower the FDA to conduct rigorous oversight to make sure foreign manufacturers comply with our safety standards. Congress must also work with industry to move away from cost being the only factors in purchasing. We must incentivize manufacturers and purchasers to consider quality when they are sourcing active pharmaceutical ingredients and final dose form medicines. And we must expand testing of these drugs and ingredients too. There have been many recommendations made before this committee on how to ensure the drugs that enter the U.S. market are high quality. This includes legislation like our bipartisan Clear Labels Act or proposals to expand supply chain mapping. I'm thrilled that there is so much bipartisan excitement around strengthening our generic pharmaceutical supply, and I look forward to working with Chairman Scott and other members of this committee to solve these evergreen problems. Thank you.
Okay, so for everybody that is not aware, actually the majority of our pharmaceuticals and what's called the API, which is the raw ingredients that pharmacies use to make medications, most of them come from overseas. The majority come from China and India. Really, China's where we get the majority of our API. And the FDA doesn't allow all manufacturers to sell to the U.S. They have what's called a green list. So they do have certain companies that they've partnered with and supposedly, tested and given them a green flag, and that's who American pharmacies are supposed to be purchasing their API from. Now, I'm really interested in hearing what everyone has to say today because I feel like there's a lot of propaganda, especially within the last couple of years, against China and their manufacturing. And we hear a lot on the news that China's bad, they are poisoning us, they're trying to kill Americans, they're trying to take over America, they're buying up our lands, they're trying to infiltrate our country and promote communism. But I don't think that is 100% true. And I think the thing that bothers me, especially last year when Trump was enforcing all of those tariffs, especially with China, is people were really criticizing China. But the reality of it is there's some really good manufacturing services and skilled laborers that come from China. And these people have been making products and goods for decades, and they're really good at what they do. Yes, we do get things much, much cheaper if it's made in China, but that doesn't always mean that it's bad. There are some really good things that come out of China. Like I said, the majority of our pharmaceuticals and our API comes from China. So when you hear all that propaganda about China's bad, we shouldn't get anything from China, that's not necessarily true. But again, I'm really interested to hear, what evidence they have that shows they're having issues with these Chinese manufacturers. Because again, the FDA is approving these manufacturers. They're on the green list. So let's continue.
I want to thank our Ranking Member Gillibrand for her bipartisan support of efforts to change our drug supply chain in this country. Our witness panel has firsthand experience in their personal and professional lives with the low-quality generics that are harming everyday Americans. I'd like to thank them for being here today to discuss their experiences and how we can stop substandard foreign drugs from entering the U.S. market. Lisa Sahlberg is the founder of HCMA and has spent decades advocating for patients with her rare heart condition. She knows firsthand what is at stake when drug quality fails. Living with a transplanted heart, she depends on her medication to survive. When she was switched to a substandard generic that was ineffective, it nearly cost her her life. Thankfully, she was able to figure out it was the medication causing her decline in health before it was too late. Now she's an advocate, a strong advocate for drug quality and transparency. I want to thank you for being here today, and please tell your story.
Thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Gillibrand and distinguished members of the committee for this opportunity to address you today. My name is Lisa Sahlberg, and I literally come to you with my heart in my hands. This is my literal physical heart that has been explanted. I bet that's a first. I'm asking for your help to protect lives of patients like me who depend on generic medication every day. We think we're saving money, but we may be adding to the financial health burden of our nation in ways yet unmeasured. I was born and raised in Rockaway Township, New Jersey, and I was diagnosed in middle school in 1980 with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a genetic heart muscle disease that runs in my family and through generations. It has claimed many lives far too soon, including my sister. My personal medical history includes 2 pacemakers, 5 implantable defibrillators, a lifetime of cardiac medication. I had a stroke in 1990. I'm partially blind in one eye. I have had progressive heart failure, and then in 2017, I got a transplant. It was on Groundhog's Day that I received a donor heart from a woman named Brandy, and we are a beautiful match. We are perfect together. She has helped me regain nearly perfect health I'm fighting now to protect. In 1995, after I lost my sister, I founded the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association, a nonprofit that has served over 20,000 families worldwide, and HCMA has developed 62 centers of excellence across the nation's most prestigious academic and health communities in the country. We've aided in drug discovery, advanced diagnostics, and we've connected over 500,000 patients with the right doctors. I've published over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles. I've written 3 books. I'm not a physician. I'm a patient advocate. And I'm here because the system is failing people like me. So my first experience with generic drugs, we'll talk about in just a second. But what I thought was a personal anomaly has revealed itself to be a systematic failure with life-threatening consequences for patients nationwide. My experience isn't unique. It's a pattern. First time was 1996. I was taking beta blockers to manage my heart rate. A generic beta blocker replaced my name brand, and after 2 doses, my heart rate wasn't coming down. I went back to the brand name and thought this was a me thing. Years later, my dear friend, Dr. Harry Lever from the Cleveland Clinic, had heard a news report and said, Lisa, we need to talk. I think I know why we're having these problems with our patients having erratic responses to their blood pressures. So guess what? It wasn't a me thing. It's a we thing. So 2017, I get my transplant. I'm going to be prescribed tacrolimus, brand name Prograf. It's to prevent rejection. My insurance was not covering a name brand, forcing me to generics and some tricky territory. Tacrolimus is managed by monitoring your levels. If you go too high, you burn out your kidneys and other things. If you go too low, you risk rejection. So my target's 6.5 to 7.5. I remained on one manufacturer as best I could, but shortages, and eventually that one was taken off the market, Knowing the variables, I take my very fragile veins to a lot of draws for blood and a lot of expense in that as well. And sometimes I have to get more than one blood draw a month to make sure my levels are okay. Sometimes it was coming in too high, 9.9. You shake when it goes too high. But when it came in at 3.9 and it's too low and I'm open to rejection, there are no symptoms. You're just open to rejection. So now I pay $120 a month per dose of my name brand Prograf because I can't trust generics. My life literally depends upon it. Across the HCMA network and beyond, patients report to me daily emergency room visits, missed work, deteriorating health, and we do the work and we find that they've changed their manufacturer of a drug, and let's go back to the other one and see how you're feeling. There is no accountability, no transparency, and no recourse for patients in these situations. We should mention that 85% of our generic drugs come into this country through 3 different providers or purchasers. So what do we do to fix it? Well, I'm going to urge all of you to pursue concrete codified reforms, not voluntary guidelines, to modernize our generic drug system and to hold purchasers and manufacturers and decision makers accountable. The base of all this is Hatch-Waxman. We got to go back and fix it. We need to make sure that ANDAs not only require meeting bioequivalence, but dissolution rates. That's been the problem in all of my drugs. The dissolution rate is wrong. And we need to inspect every batch of medication brought into the United States before it hits anybody's system. We cannot send red-labeled drugs out to patients. We need to use independent laboratory testing, the red, yellow, green that you guys have heard.
Wait. I assumed that we already did this. I assumed that when we got a batch of medications that were from another country, that we were required to test them. And this woman, and she's probably right, is saying that that's not part of our protocol. That's very shocking to me. Very shocking. Especially because in the US, we have something called compound pharmacies. We have 2 types of compound pharmacies. One is a 5013A and then a 5013B. 503A, 503B, there's no one, sorry. So an A compounding pharmacy goes direct to the patient. So they make the compound specifically for the patients, and then they send it to the patient. Whereas a B pharmacy makes it in bulk and sends it directly to the doctor or the clinic, and they either use it in clinic or they dispense it to the patients. But just so you guys know, those compound pharmacies are usually under a lot of scrutiny from the FDA. The FDA is constantly going into those pharmacies, doing audits, and they're required to batch test pretty much everything that they're dispensing from an independent lab. It's a very costly procedure, but these pharmacies in the US are required to do that before they can dispense these medications to patients. And they go through very stringent audits, like I said, regularly, much more regularly than like a big pharma lab or a big pharma pharmacy. It is shocking to me to hear that we don't have those same protocols in place for generic drugs that are coming from other countries. Again, I just always assumed that we did. It's very, very shocking. The other thing I want you guys to know is a generic drug does not have to be 100% the same as the brands. I think, I'm not even going to speculate. I want to say it has to be like 85% the same. I don't know why I'm thinking that number. I used to have a good friend that was in the pharmaceutical industry, and she would explain this to me. The other thing, though, that she explained is think of a generic drug like you're baking a cake and you're using Martha Stewart's recipe. So Martha Stewart, she makes this cake. It comes out perfect. You want to replicate that. You're using, the same ingredients that she's using, but you're making the cake. Martha Stewart isn't. So it's always going to come out a little bit different because, let's face it, guys, you're not Martha Stewart. And that's how she explained to me what generics are in the process. But let's continue because this is very eye-opening.
A lot about over these past few meetings. The system works, and we should be doing this more transparently. And I would hope that the FDA would publicly manage a website where all those test results could be made public. Anything red goes back to the manufacturer or destroyed at their expense, and we do not allow anybody to take red medication. And we need to give the FDA control to refuse low-quality drugs from entering the United States and hold bad actors accountable the first time, not after decades. I support bipartisan legislation like the Transparency and Quality Pharmaceutical Act that may be coming from McCormick and Delero. I'll let my friends explain that one. And I applaud you on the Clear Label Act. However, I think we need to pair it with payer-level reform so patients can actually take action on the information on the label rather than just being stuck in the lowest formulary.
You know, the other thing is most people have to take generics. A lot of insurance companies won't even cover brands anymore. The brands are usually very expensive, and if it's a drug that has a generic, typically your insurance company or your PBM requires you to take the generic, and if you have to take the brand, you have to go through all these hoops. Like your physician has to like submit a request and tell the pharmacy benefits manager why it's medically necessary for you to use the brand and not the generic. And it's a huge price difference usually as well. A lot of generics, you know, are under $10, whereas brand drugs can cost you anywhere from $50 to thousands of dollars. But this is a real thing, what she's talking about. I've experienced this, you know, in my life where even a generic from a different brand of the same medication is different. Like the pill shape is different, the color is different, and you just feel different taking it. And for a long time, I feel like doctors kind of acted like you were crazy if you talked about this. And there's a ton of like Reddit groups that go into this, especially like I've seen it with like ADHD medications. Like, you know, people are very sensitive to certain brands and certain formulations. And I've seen a lot of chats where, you know, people have taken dozens of different generics to find the right one, or they just end up having to take the brand and just jump through all these hoops. But she's definitely onto something, and I think a lot of people have probably experienced what she's experienced, but we've kind of been gaslit to think that like, oh, generics are the same, like there's something wrong with us if it doesn't work as well.
Okay. Good actors should, if they get green scores, good actors shouldn't be burdened with extra reviews. Poor quality manufacturers must be held responsible for the financial burden, the product, the destruction, and the liability for downstream health expenses caused by their drugs. And lastly, I will state that I agree with Drs. Kellerman and Schulman in the recent New England Journal article when they said, quote, the FDA should stop claiming that all generic drugs sold in the United States are equally safe and effective. It cannot verify that without product testing. Thank you very much for the time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Again, I am just blown away that they're not required to test these drugs. Every batch should be tested. I had no idea that the FDA did not require every single batch to be tested. I'm really like freaked out about this. I'm really shocked. It's very, very shocking, and I plan to look into this even further later on this week, because there's been a couple of hearings on this topic that we'll watch in the next week or so. Anyways, let's continue.
Now I'll recognize Ranking Member Gillibrand for the next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to introduce our next witness, Dr. Adam Clark-Joseph. Dr. Clark-Joseph is a Chief Analytics Officer and co-founder of Valisure, a technology company working to address a critical gap in the pharmaceutical supply chain through independent quality assurance. Dr. Clark-Joseph was driven to founding Valisure by his personal experience with significant complications arising from batch variability in his anticonvulsant medication. Dr. Clark-Joseph utilizes his expertise as a digital chemist to employ big data and machine learning for enhancing transparency in the pharmaceutical supply chain. You may begin.
Ranking Member Gillibrand, Chairman Scott, members of the committee, thank you for the honor of speaking before you today. So I've taken medicine for depression for most of my adult life. I first encountered a bad batch of medicine when I was 25. After a refill, I suddenly fell ill, and after my doctor identified the problem, he told me that sometimes you just get a bad batch. At 27, it happened again, and I became ill for months. Then at 29, after yet another incident, I used my chemistry background and some equipment in my home to test my pills myself, and I discovered that they were just massively underdosed. So that was the last straw for me. I reached out to my longtime friend, scientist David Light, and together we founded Valisure, America's first laboratory dedicated to independently testing and certifying on-market drug products. We started Valisure to address drug quality problems, but we didn't initially realize the full scope and severity of these problems. Within a few years, our findings led to recalls of more than 25 million pharmacy products, worth over $9 billion. We began testing the blockbuster drug Zantac because my infant daughter had just been prescribed the liquid form. Our discovery of the drug's instability sparked its global withdrawal. Our later work drove rolling recalls of sunscreens and hand sanitizers, as well as dozens of national recalls of multiple drugs due to the presence of various carcinogenic contaminants. So why is this shocking problem of low-quality drugs in America so under-recognized? Bluntly, it's because for 40 years, the former FDA drug leadership has claimed to everyone that all approved drugs are equivalent in quality. This demonstrably false narrative created a market that competes only on price, which incentivizes cost-cutting, overseas manufacturing, and products being made just good enough to minimize regulatory scrutiny, all in the near complete absence of independent testing. So when you buy a car, do you just want the cheapest one in its class that claims to be legal to drive on the road? Of course not. Yet this is essentially how we're forced to buy drugs in America. Now, recently, the New England Journal of Medicine published an article, which Ms. Selberg referenced, titled Substandard Generic Drugs, Threats to Patient Safety and National Security. And its very first recommendation was that the FDA should stop claiming that all generic drugs sold in the United States are equally safe and effective. Once we acknowledge that not all generics are created equal, we can end the race to the bottom and begin fostering a race to the top. The FDA currently has a closer to zero program for contaminants like lead in baby food. Clearly, the same should apply to medications. If one manufacturer's product contains far lower contaminant level than another's, then, all else being equal, shouldn't we prefer the objectively cleaner product, even if neither are so bad that they break the law? In pursuit of exactly this end, the military, via the Uniform Service University, began a project with Valisure a few years ago to independently test essential medicines and assign quality risk scores to classify suppliers as red, yellow, or green. By translating complex chemistry into these simple red, yellow, green quality risk designations, procurement decisions could easily favor objectively higher quality manufacturers and avoid lower quality ones. Incidentally, tacrolimus, which you just heard about from Ms. Sahlberg, is on the military's essential medicines list, and we found generics that rated red because the pills dissolved too quickly. Notably, the FDA received so many complaints that after 11 years, it completed a clinical study and concluded a lack of bioequivalence to the brand. Our independent chemical testing effectively reached the same conclusion in weeks rather than years and identified the root cause mechanism. More broadly, testing across 25 drugs and 359 suppliers has already shown that 72% of the suppliers scored green, while 15% scored red. There was no correlation between price and quality. Also, on average, higher contaminant levels were found in certain drugs manufactured in India and China than in the same drugs made in the US. Simply buying green and avoiding red could be transformational for incentivizing quality in American-made medicine. It could also save billions of dollars and thousands of lives. This is not just a theoretical concept. Kaiser Permanente, which, like both the military and the VA, represents several percent of the US pharmaceutical market, already requires independent testing of certain generic drugs that it procures, and has been doing so for years. We know this works, and it works at scale. Representatives Rich McCormick and Rosa DeLauro will be introducing the bipartisan Transparency and Quality in Pharmaceuticals Act to incorporate USU's chemical quality metrics and also independently derived manufacturing location metrics into military drug procurement. They're also working to include this bill in the NDAA and provide funding in the fiscal year 2027 Defense Appropriations Bill. We respectfully ask that this committee support this legislation. It's our one Singular recommendation, because after over a decade of researching the problem, we strongly believe that this is the most impactful solution available. Thank you again for your engagement on this critical issue and for allowing me to share my story.
So let's just be real here. Like, this committee is not the most lively bunch. I mean, I can barely hear Rick Scott when he's talking. Like, somebody needs to fix that man's microphone. But you don't have the same political theater in this committee right now that we see in some of the other congressional or Senate hearings that we stream. But if you're watching this and listening to this right now, you should be really angry. I'm really angry listening to this. Again, I cannot believe that our FDA does not require each batch of generics coming from China and India to be independently tested. This is like mind-blowing to me, especially because Big Pharma and the news has been so salty and putting out so much scary propaganda about peptides and saying that, oh, these are Chinese peptides and they're sketchy and they're black market and you shouldn't purchase them. But the reality of the situation is a lot of these research peptides and research companies that are out there are doing tons of independent testing, and a lot of the product is like 99% pure. They won't sell it to the public unless it's 99% pure. So they have this campaign and this mission to eradicate Chinese peptides because it's bad, it's whatever. But these companies that they're trying to demonize literally go through so much more scrutiny to independently test what they're selling to Americans. And they don't even have to because it's not FDA regulated. And even the stuff that is FDA regulated, they tried to get rid of and demonize also under the Biden admin. They took a bunch of peptides, I believe it was 14 peptides that were on the Category 1 list, and put them illegally, this is according to RFK, they illegally put them on the Category 2 list. So people could no longer get them from a compound pharmacy. And they should have never been put on the Category 2 list because the Category 2 list means that there's a safety issue. And there was never any safety issues with these peptides. I don't know why that was done. Probably has to do with Big Pharma and lobbying. But people that use peptides are having like pretty much like miraculous transformations. And like I said, if you pay attention to the news and you're in the wellness community, like you see this propaganda that they're trying to demonize peptides and trying to tell you that they're bad because they're from China, when, like I said, the reality is a lot of the reputable companies are really going above and beyond to make sure that they're independently testing and the product is really pure. And we cannot say this about the generics that we're getting from our pharmacies. And a lot of these medications are being given to our senior population. There's a lot of seniors, people over 65 in America, that take like a handful of like 10 or 15 generic medications a day. And we have no idea what's in them. We have no idea what's in them. Gosh, no wonder so many people are dealing with dementia and memory problems. Who knows what they're actually taking in their prescriptions? And again, I'm just so blown away. I had no idea that they were not required to independently test all these meds coming from foreign countries.
Participate in these hearings on drug safety, supply chains, and risk to aging Americans. I am a physician scientist who studies mechanisms of aging-related chronic diseases, particularly those that damage the brain and cause insulin resistance, like diabetes, obesity, and dementia. My educational and academic backgrounds have equipped me to conduct such research, understand their societal impact, and experimentally demonstrate how the toxins' exposures cause chronic disease states that are currently epidemic and particularly afflict seniors. In contrast to messaging designed to pin these problems on genes, in fact, the decade-over-decade increases in chronic disease rates mirror the effects of exposure rather than aging or genetics per se. Well,
I
what
just
could
said that.
possibly be the culprit? Convergent factors, including several of the testimonies highlighting significant quality concerns about generic medications manufactured in foreign countries, drew my attention to this committee. Prior to that, I had already begun to investigate the potential cause of several insulin-resistant diseases in a person I'll refer to as Sam. Sam was previously healthy, gainfully employed, and productive. His only medical problem was hypertension. However, after taking 2 years of a prescribed generic antihypertensive medication, Sam developed type 2 diabetes, obesity, muscle weakness, and metabolic problems. His symptoms worsened, his cell status progressively deteriorated, rendering him chronically ill and virtually incapable of caring for himself or his disabled child. Deep dives into Sam's new unexpected complex illnesses led to evidence that he had been chronically exposed to toxic levels of nitrosamines present in his prescribed antihypertensive medication. My expertise includes research and non-cancer causes of toxic effects of nitrosamines. We know that chronic low-dose exposures can cause insulin-resistant diseases, diabetes, obesity, dementia. Sam's blood work and eventually records released from the pharmacy confirmed that his nitrosamine exposures had occurred via contaminated lots of his medication. Sam, now debilitating chronic disease state, mirrors what we've observed in experimental models and in humans exposed to nitrosamines from various sources, including dietary and medicinal. How many people were exposed and developed these serious side effects, we don't know. Unfortunately, despite an FDA recall early in 2025, contaminated lots of the index medicine continue to be sold in the United States. Sam, unaware of the recall, took the medication as prescribed. Nitrosamine contamination of drugs is an old story in pharmaceutical industry, but the problem is managed or eliminated by standardized clean manufacturing protocols, extensive monitoring, end product testing, and quality control. Nitrosamine contamination is just one example of how lax regulatory oversight in generic drug manufacturing can have devastating effects on health. Problems concerning unsafe drug manufacturing disproportionately impact seniors, in part because they are victims of polypharmacy. More than 40% of Americans who are over 65 take 5 prescribed medications a day, and between 10% and 20% take 10 or more per day. Healthcare providers often prescribe additional drugs to combat the side effects of the targeted therapeutics.
I told you, I just said
However,
this.
side effects from those drugs add even more prescriptions. Matters are worsened by many non-prescription generic medications used by seniors. More drugs mean increased risk for adverse events like toxin contamination exposure. Growing concerns about generic drugs originating in foreign countries, particularly China and India, and that were widely sold at attractive, possibly unrealistically low prices in the United States, stem from unacceptable manufacturing conditions and lax oversight on quality, safety, and efficacy. These problems threaten the health and welfare of consumers, particularly seniors. Circling back to our extreme reliance on cheaper but concerning quality generics, the year-over-year soaring prevalence rates of chronic diseases, including diabetes and dementia, parallel the rate shifts in overseas poorly regulated generic drug manufacturing, coupled with polypharmacy. Sadly, this cascade is driven by financial gains, yet makes no sense to spend lavish amounts of money on so many medicines that make so many seniors sicker and sicker with chronic diseases. Thank you.
Every speaker that comes on, I'm learning so much that I wish I didn't have to learn about. And again, I'm just so blown away with what I'm learning in this hearing. It's very, very troubling. She literally just summarized what I said before. We're giving our seniors these medications. Some people are taking 5 meds, some 10, some 20. They have a side effect, and instead of thinking, maybe it's the medication, maybe we need to take them off this medication and do something else, change their diet, a supplement. Nope, we're going to give you another medication to counteract that side effect. And then that next medication gives you another side effect, and then you're prescribed another drug. And all of a sudden, you're popping 30 pills a day. And they have no idea what's in your medication. And what I think she was saying is the toxins in these generic meds, and we don't even know how many is in there because apparently our FDA does not require any independent testing, are actually causing all of these health conditions in people. And these people just think that they're doing what their doctor told them to do. They think that they're good patients. Their doctor prescribes them a med. They take it exactly as the doctor prescribes. And they trust their doctor to help them so they can live longer or have a better quality of life. And what's happening is the opposite effect. Their quality of life has been severely compromised. And I see this a lot, especially when I worked with seniors during like COVID. I think I shared in another stream. I worked in insurance, and during the COVID lockdowns, a lot of people over 50 wanted to get life insurance, final expense insurance, and I used to joke that after I got done writing an application, I had carpal tunnel syndrome from typing in, all the meds that these people were taking. But what she's saying is absolutely true. Our senior population is on a lot of meds, and I kind of feel silly. I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think that, maybe these meds that they're taking could be causing dementia, could be causing these issues. I really never thought about that, and that's really naive of me. And I'm sure some of you that are watching this have had this thought process that it could be causing it. But I really, truly believed that these companies were obligated to test the drugs before dispensing them. I had no idea that there's no oversight, no independent testing. I had no idea that this was a thing. And I'll tell you what, guys. I'm a third-generation business owner. I am all about capitalism. I love capitalism. I love America. I think we are the greatest nation, and I want capitalism and free markets to continue. But we have gone a little bit too far with the greed aspect. We have allowed companies, and there's a lot of companies that are doing this, to basically sacrifice the safety and the quality of life of our citizens just to make some extra money. And that is wrong, and that should not be allowed. And what really is bothering me about this hearing, and I'm sure it's an unpopular opinion, but I am really displeased with the FDA. I don't even understand why the FDA exists at this point. The way that I see the FDA is that the FDA is supposed to be a government agency. We, as taxpayers, we're paying the FDA. We're paying the FDA to have oversight on the things that we put in our mouth, drugs, food. And the FDA's sole responsibility before they approve something is to make sure that it's safe for us to utilize. And how many times has the FDA got it wrong? How many times has the FDA approved something, said it was safe, and then a few years later, a bunch of people are dead. People are being born without limbs. People are getting massively addicted to a medication that was supposed to not cause addiction, that was supposed to be totally safe. You can just, give an Oxycontin to somebody with a migraine or a toothache, and don't worry, we got this study here that says that it's not addictive. Trust us. Don't do any oversight of your own, FDA. Just trust us. It's safe. And then there's no accountability from the FDA. Nobody from the FDA gets in trouble. You don't hear about an FDA employee getting in trouble for approving something that caused massive casualties. That's just my opinion. I'm sure a lot of people don't agree with me, but I think the FDA is a terrible government agency. They have failed so many times, and it's so aggravating that our tax money pays them to literally approve things and make sure that we're safe, and they are just failing. They fail so often.
Thank you for your testimony. Next is we have Dinesh Thakur, is a public health advocate who put everything on the line as a whistleblower against Indian manufacturer Ranbaxy, exposing systemic violations of FDA manufacturing standards that resulted in a $500 million settlement with the DOJ. Now he advocates for drug quality, stronger FDA oversight, and holding foreign manufacturers accountable who cut corners at the expense of American patients. He is a proud Floridian. Thank you for being here. Please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and distinguished members of this committee. I thank you for convening this hearing on this topic that impacts all of us. My background and training are documented in my written statement. I was a whistleblower in the prosecution of a generic drug company by the US DOJ in May of 2013, where that Indian company pled guilty to 7 counts of criminal felony and agreed to pay $500 million in fines to the US government. While I've presented my analysis and made substantive recommendations in my written statement, which I've submitted to this committee, I beg your indulgence now. Let me provide you a few concrete examples of the issues that I referred to in my statement. We intentionally picked these examples that are not technical. I have a whole stack of these investigation reports here, which I'm more than happy to hand it over to the committee today. Let me give an example of a company called Ipca Laboratories, an Indian generic manufacturer that makes and sells metoprolol tartrate and furosemide, beta blocker and a diuretic in our market here in the United States. Let me walk through the chronology of how we have held this company to account for its fraudulent behavior over the last 16 years. In 2014, based on an inspection report of Form 483, US FDA inspectors Peter Baker and Joanne King, this is what they said. The company was manipulating test results so that they could pass inspections by playing with instruments and their controls. Backdating results. The report says integration parameters are manipulated in order to achieve passing results. Raw data files have been manipulated, deleted from the system. In October of 2014, US FDA inspectors Peter Baker and Deepesh Shaw had similar observations in their inspection reports. They spoke about attempts to hide results from review, overwriting raw data files, original reports, results not being reported, and partially shredding documents. The US FDA went back to do a follow-up inspections 5 years later, in August of 2019. Inspectors Arsen Karapetian and Patrick Upadhyay said in their report, which I have a copy here, it says that a cascade of failures in your quality control responsibilities, missing raw data, repeat analysis by preparing fresh samples when the original testing failed. The US FDA conducted another inspection in 2023, led by investigators Rajiv Srivastava and Kelly Hicks. And they said in their report, which I have a copy here, the company invalidated out-of-specification results without a scientific valid cause. Investigation kept open for 10 months without justification. The US FDA conducted another inspection last year, led by investigator Salim Akhtar. And it said in his report here, for the US market, the facilities are not cleaned properly to minimize contamination and fail to provide scientific data. In fact, in January 2016, the US FDA Director of Manufacturing Quality, Thomas Cosgrove, had this to say about this company. Your firm routinely retested samples without justification. We observed systematic manipulation of data, backdating test data, manipulating parameters to obtain passing results. And here is the punchline. In 2017, in August, the US Office of Criminal Investigation closed investigation of this firm. In late 2022, the US FDA inspectors this is one example. Another example is a drug called cisplatin. This is a drug that is used to treat cancer. We had a shortage of this drug in this country back in 2022. And this company, the company that made this drug, was a single source for us based in India. And the warning letter issued to this particular company by the Director of Manufacturing Quality at the US FDA, Francis Goodwin, said in this warning letter, our investigators observed plastic bags filled with torn and discarded original GMP documents. An analyst destroyed GMP records by pouring acetic acid in the trash bin containing analytical balance slips. Your electronic batch records allow changes to be made in manual entries. The point I'm trying to make here, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Gillibrand, imagine if this behavior was observed and documented in a financial services firm. The records demonstrating illegal behavior were destroyed by pouring acetic acid into waste bins. Would we accept that? The fact that would we let Enron go by paying a fine and not holding Mr. Lay and Mr. Skilling accountable? This is what we are doing right now. And then we hear from my panelists here that we continue to have bad quality drugs in the country. Is this time for you to call up the US FDA Office of Criminal Investigation and ask them very pointedly why these investigations are being closed? I thank you for your time.
I want to thank each of you. We'll start with questions. We'll start with Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Today, we're not discussing a new issue, as we all know. America has lost power in the generic drug and pharmaceutical ingredient market. We're relying on China for several drugs, and it goes deeper than a trade issue. It is a national security issue. This is not a partisan issue with talking points. There is real-life patient harm and oversight that has fallen short, and we just heard an excellent testimony from Salzberg here about her past and her problems, and we thank her for being here today. I want to start with Dr. De La Monte. Can you tell me how often unannounced inspections happen in foreign pharmaceutical facilities?
I can't tell you how often, but I know they're infrequent and they're often tipped. And so there's no way to actually hold them truly accountable for what's going on.
Thank you. Mr. Thakur, can you paint a really good picture for us of a lab in India, and especially you worked in them, about what you see when you go in there, what they're trying to hide, not trying to hide? Can you paint a good picture for everybody here for that?
Sure. I can speak to you from my own experience working in India. I had misfortune of working in a company in India for 18 months. Typically what happened in those days was that the US FDA gave essentially a 2-month intimation saying that we're coming to inspect your facilities. Now that changed after Ranbaxy. The US FDA established in offices in India and China, but they closed them down. And I don't know why. You have to ask them for that. But in that particular case, when the inspector comes in, the way that our regulations work, the GMP regulations work, is we have an honor system. What we do is we say, this is how you told us that you make the drug. When we come and inspect you, we want to make sure that we see that you follow what you've told us. When you asked us for approving this drug, this is what market authorization in this country really means. When we go there, we look over documentation. We look at their processes. And it's very easy to game that if people are given a head notice. In my case, the egregious example that I knew about was that in 2005, when an inspector came in and asked for certain documents which were not available, the inspector was told, well, we'll give it to you tomorrow morning. And overnight, the company fabricated those documents, put them in a steam room to make them look like old documents. Now, is that acceptable to us?
No.
Thank you.
Ms. Salzberg, how can we have high-quality generic drugs? How do you think we can do that?
Simply inspect every batch that comes into the United States at the manufacturer or the purchaser's expense and send anything that is not the quality that is in the original ANDA right on back where it came from.
Dr. Joseph, I'm intrigued with your ability to test your own drugs. Can you explain that?
Yes. So I studied, although my degree wasn't in chemistry, I studied quite a bit of chemistry in college, and I worked in my professor's laboratory one summer. Everybody's got to have a hobby. I am a little bit on the nerdy side.
You think?
Yes.
He's the football coach. Do not listen to him. He doesn't know. He doesn't know.
But yes, so I had a number of reagents, glassware, microbalances, and so on. And I had been playing around with similar sorts of, I took lots of supplements. I tried breaking those down into their component pieces and so on. So I'd done similar tasks before, and yeah, the stars aligned to, in this case.
Yeah. And you brought up one point there. We're talking about generic drugs. We have tens of billions of dollars spent in this country every year on supplements that are on the counter that are not prescription drugs, and there's no telling.
But who cares? What does that matter? The FDA isn't even doing it right with pharmaceuticals that are supposed to be heavily regulated. So why would we need them to approve supplements? They do such a poor job. I mean, thank God for RFK in our corner. A lot of things have been brought to light, and he's doing his best to kind of reverse all of these toxic chemicals that are being put in our food and drugs. I mean, gosh, how long has Red 40 been in our food? And it's heavily put in children's foods. And we've known that it causes cancer. We've known for a long time, but it was allowed to be put in food that is targeted for children. Candy, cereals, cookies, crackers, all have Red 40. And RFK was successful in getting it taken out and banned. It's banned in other countries. But the thing that blows my mind also is manufacturers weren't required to take it out right away. They had a grace period of a couple of years where, you still have foods right now that have Red 40 in it. But next year or 2028 or whatever, I don't know the exact year, that's when they have to stop making stuff with Red 40. Please make it make sense. But I really don't like when they try to pivot to, supplements and this and that. That's not FDA approved either. I don't want that to be FDA approved. I want the FDA out of my life. I don't know about what you guys feel. The FDA is doing such a poor job. I don't want them policing my supplements. I don't want them policing anything anymore. I think we should either completely revamp the FDA or just get rid of them because they're really not that useful. Personally, I think when you go to purchase a supplement, you need to investigate who you're purchasing it from. Are you purchasing it from a reliable company that has safeguards, that does its own independent testing? And actually, there are a lot of companies out there that are very ethical, that truly want to produce a great product that works and spend a lot of their own money that they really don't have to, but they do because they want to bring a great product to market. So they spend a lot of their own money on testing things independently and making sure everything that they're selling is high quality. So I personally would rather do my own research and find brands like that I trust than just go along with what the FDA says is safe or not. Because again, they do it wrong so many times. And I don't want Congress and the Senate to use this issue as an excuse to control us and control what we put into our body. They need to be doing less regulation. They are doing such a poor job. Why would we want more regulation? They need to do less or just do it right the first time. The other thing I want to share with you guys too, because again, I feel like this hearing's a little bit of propaganda against offshore countries. But our own facilities don't always pass FDA inspections. And It's like those big companies like Eli Lilly, for example. Eli Lilly, they got what's called a Form 483 in October of 2023 in their Indianapolis facility. And the FDA observed that the procedures meant to prevent microbiological contamination of sterile drug products were not established or followed. And examples of that included sterile contact surfaces not maintained as sterile and aseptic practices not followed during fill line setup. So they got this letter, this form called a 483, saying, hey, you're not following the protocol. Your line, your fill line is not sterile. That's like really big, guys, like really big. And then also in June of 2023, the Indianapolis facility got another Form 483 where the FDA said Lilly did not follow written production process control procedures, including moving equipment into a critical grade A aseptic area without required sanitization. FDA also cited poor sample traceability and inadequate equipment validation for sterilization. Another big pharma lab, Pfizer, Hospira, in McPherson, Kansas, they got a warning letter back in 2017. FDA said Hospira, a Pfizer company, had significant CGMP violations. The FDA cited inadequate investigations into visible particles in sterile injectable drugs, including cardboard and, I'm not going to say this right, vancomycin vials, delayed recall action, and inadequate corrective action. So let's not act like everything that's made in America is perfect and the issue is China. It's not. So don't let them fool you. Let's continue.
What's in these things, and you know, they look pretty in the bottles, and most of us in here take a supplement or whatever. You got any thoughts on that, Mr. LeCure?
Regulation for medicine actually is fairly extensive. Regulation for supplements is significantly below standards for us in terms of regulation of what really happens. The example that Senator Scott spoke about the deaths from eye drops, these were over-the-counter eye drops. And so we trusted that when we go to CVS and Walgreens and actually buy these, that you know, they're supposed to work the way that they're intended. And we see issues of contamination of bacteria that, you know, people lost sight. And we had deaths, you know, in those cases. So that's an egregious example, but the regulation of supplements is significantly lower compared to the regulation for medicine.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Clark Joseph and Mr. Thacker, independent testing for international manufacturing. The global nature of generic drug supply chain means that 40% of finished dose products sold in the U.S. are produced abroad. When inspecting international facilities, the FDA routinely gives foreign manufacturers up to 12 weeks advance notice, which is a lot. This allows bad actors 3 months to falsify data, sanitize facilities, cover up noncompliance. The FDA also does not routinely perform independent random testing of generic drugs already on the market.
I mean, in my opinion, there's a very simple solution to all of this. If we are importing something from a foreign country, we need to test it before we put it out on the market. I mean, to me, it's so simple. Why isn't that done? I mean, I know why it's not done. It's because, again, we're all about greed here in America, and we just let Big Pharma get away with so many egregious violations against humanity. Because, you know, their shareholders just need to be multimillionaire and billionaires at the expense of the American people and their health and their longevity and their quality of life. And our government gets paid a lot of money by people in Big Pharma and lobbyists, and Big Pharma likes to fund a lot of campaigns on both sides of the aisle. So this just continuously keeps on happening. Again, to me, it's very simple what we can do to fix these problems, but we have to have this hearing where we skirt around the actual resolution and point our fingers at everyone else and, act shocked that, somebody would be trying to cut corners to save a buck when we're doing that and we're allowing that to be done all the time here in America by big corporations. And again, I am not a socialist. I'm not a communist. I am very conservative and, if anything, libertarian leaning. And I love capitalism. But capitalism is not a monopoly. Capitalism is not just egregious greed. That's not what capitalism is, but we have allowed that in our country. Well, anyways, guys, it is late here on the East Coast. I am going to finish up the stream for the night. I will definitely be back here tomorrow to continue with it, and I hope everybody has a great, great evening. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.